So Papaji recruited me to be his official biographer in 1992. So that gave me carte blanche to quiz him about anything I liked, and this is one of the things that I asked him about on several occasions. We went round and round the subject and I could never quite get to the bottom of it. So if you want a traditional A comes before B comes before C chronology of his life, you could say that there was a culminating moment in front of Bhagavan where Bhagavan showed him the self, he became established as the self, and that he was in that state from that moment on. Prior to that moment he wasn't really aware of it. That's a traditional approach, that there's ignorance up to a certain point, and then the illumination comes, ignorance ends. I could never get Papaji to agree to that narrative, although it's the most sensible way of narrating the events. What he told me is that at the end of the First World War, there was a public holiday to commemorate the British victory, and that his family went off to Lahore to visit relatives there, and it must have been a hot May evening. He said they were serving mango lassis in a courtyard of the house. He said, I was given a mango lassi to drink, and he said I wasn't able to drink it. I just got into a state of complete paralysis just holding this thing in my hand. And he said that was my experience of the self. He said, in a way, that experience never left. He said, I voluntarily ignored it, ran away from it, misdirected it, but he said in the background, for my whole life, that undercurrent to some extent was there. It didn't come, go away, then I had to look for it again. He said somehow that self-experience never left me, but I had a whole bunch of stupid ideas that made me look for bliss, God, in the wrong direction. The whole Krishna Bhakti thing was one misdirected effort. At one point he became what nowadays we would call a terrorist. He joined a violent militant gang who didn't believe in Gandhi's non-violence. He said that he was involved in plots to kill the British Viceroy. He was involved in all kinds of mad, violent escapades. So it's kind of hard to square his contention that there was an undercurrent of self-awareness, self-knowledge all the time, on top of which was this, for example, episode in a Punjabi gang who was sworn to overthrow the British by force. And he told me that he gave up. He said, I realized from a practical point of view that the British had a far superior armed force in India, and that no gang of saboteurs was ever going to overthrow the British Empire. So he said it wasn't that I lost interest in kicking them out. He said I just realized that a semi-trained rabble such as the one I was in wasn't going to achieve any results. So this led him at a later date to volunteer to join the British Army. Now again, this is a rather bizarre career choice for a man who was a Krishna Bhakta, who was saying that at some level I was consciously aware of myself as self. I was a Krishna Bhakta. So I said, why would you want to join the British Army? You're trying to kick them out. He said, I thought if I joined the army I could get training in British military tactics, armaments, and then I'd be better equipped to carry on my campaign to kick the British out of India. So still, on top of this substratum of knowing self, was this very peculiar script, this destiny of wanting to be a violent militant to expel the British from India. So he has some hilarious stories about this double life he led in the British Army. He says that he graduated from Dehradun, which is a military academy, became an officer in the army, and once you've graduated you get a Batman to look after you. And he said he would discharge his Batman in the evening and say, don't disturb me, I'm going to spend the night by myself, don't come by till 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. And then he said he would lock himself in his room, and as soon as the door was locked he'd take his British Army uniform off and dress up in a sari. He wanted to be a Krishna gopi. He wanted to dance in front of Krishna. So by day he was marching up and down the parade ground, practicing his rifles and shouting at his troops. Then he'd lock the door at night, strip off, put a sari on. He said, I spent all my salary on buying jewelry and makeup, and he said I'd spend the entire night being a gopi and dancing in front of my statue of Krishna, trying to make Krishna appear in this army barracks I was stationed at. And he said Krishna would come. He said sometimes we'd spend the whole night dancing in this military barracks. And then at 7 o'clock the next morning he'd sober up a bit, change his outfits, he'd put his military uniform back on again, and he'd go out for breakfast. And he said his commanding officer, he said I could put the uniform on, but I couldn't wipe the grin off my face. So I turned up for breakfast looking like I'd been drinking all night. It looked like I was drunk. So he said the colonel of my regiment told the barman never to serve me any drinks in the bar, because he just assumed I was spending the whole night in my room getting drunk. So there are all these extraordinary episodes, the time in the gang, training in the army, where there was a kind of double life. One part of him wanted to be an active, violent militant. Underneath there was a passionate desire to see Krishna, and successfully on occasions, he saw him many times. But he said all this was playing itself out on an undercurrent of self which never actually left me. So he said it's wrong to see all this as a chronology of ignorance succeeded by knowledge and illumination. He said there were all these competing events, these competing personae on top of this substratum of self. I actually knew who I was, but on top of all this was this desire to be a militant, a desire to throw the British out, a desire to learn military tactics, a desire to see God. And he said what finally happened when I saw the Maharshi in Tiruvannamalai for the last time was he stopped me having any desire, any interest in looking outside of myself for anything that could be attained that wasn't myself. He said that was the role that my guru played in my life. He stopped me wanting to have a military or political goal. He stopped me wanting to see God. He showed me that I am the self. He established me in that state, and he put me there. He forced me into that state with such a definitive push that I never left it and never ever desired anything other than self again. I must tell a Shivani story. Shivani lived in Madras with Papaji, and occasionally she would come here and have darshan of Bhagavan at weekends when Papaji came. The first time she came, she sat in front of Bhagavan and immediately went into samadhi. She couldn't be woken up for the lunch. She just sat there completely oblivious to the world, to her body. And Major Chadwick, probably in a good-humoured way, said to Bhagavan, Look at this. This girl's only been here 10 minutes and she's gone into samadhi. What about all the rest of us? We've been here years waiting for this, and you haven't given us this experience. And Bhagavan smiled and said, how do you know she's not older than you? Meaning she was probably some kind of old soul who was ready for the experience, and as soon as she sat down in Bhagavan's hall, it happened to her. So Papaji told me this story in Lucknow, and he said every time I ask her to tell me what happened, she has no idea, she can't explain, but something in her goes back to that experience, and it touches her so deeply even today that you see a kind of startled paralysis in her face, and she can't speak, and then she starts crying. So you wait, next time she comes, we'll try it out. So a few weeks later, Shivani comes for dinner, and Papaji gives me a nudge and says, tell David about that time you sat in front of Ramana Maharshi and went into samadhi. And I looked at her face, and just all the colour drained out of it. She really looked like her face had been paralysed, and then the tears just started streaming down her cheeks. Papaji said, you see, she's never been able to tell anyone, even me, what happened to her that day, but if you ask her about that experience, this is the only answer you ever get. So, a very special lady. Anyway, so I asked her, I said, you know, I talked to your dad, and he said, I said, when did you start teaching? And he said, when I was 8 years old. I said, is that really true? I mean, it seems a bit ridiculous for an 8-year-old to be doing this kind of teaching activity. And she was born early, mid-1930s, I forget the exact date. And she said, my earliest experiences of him go back to about 1938. She said, that's when I remember. We used to travel around a lot. We had different jobs in different places. He never ever advertised himself as a spiritual teacher. He never wore orange robes. He never put on any airs and graces or said he was anyone special. We'd go to a new town. He'd start his job, and within 24 hours, people would be banging on the door asking to see him. And he said, if you didn't close your windows, there would be people trying to jump in through the windows. That there was something about this man that he couldn't hide himself. He had a power, an ability to transmit that power, and even before he had his final experience with Bhagavan, that power was attracting people, and we couldn't hide. Wherever he went, people would find us and they'd besiege us.